So I guess we are live. Good evening, world. It is Thursday, May the 6th. This is episode 2 of Spy Squared. For those of you who was for the first time, welcome. If you're coming back, welcome back. This is a conversation between myself, Phil Gursky of Borealis Threat Risk Consulting, former analyst at CSE and CSIS, and my good friend Al Chudenik, former RCMP and CSIS as well. We talk about all types of things, national security and terrorism related. So Al, over to you.
Oh, well, thanks, Phil. Hello, everyone. Thanks for signing on to the I guess it's not a podcast. It's a YouTube broadcast.
Yeah, we're having fun.
With Phil the Star. So today we thought we'd talk about the going dark issue, and that has to deal with encryption. So it's lawful access versus privacy. And I think the way to start off this is, Phil, your former SIGINT expert. What do you think of this? And give us your thoughts.
Sure. Before I start, though, I wanted to say, Al, I don't know if you see what I'm wearing tonight.
Nice. Good, man.
Yeah, so this is a Winnipeg Jets jersey. If you weren't with us last week, Al gave me a profound insult by saying I drove the Zamboni for the Montreal Canadiens rather than played net for them. Now, since Al's from Winnipeg, I thought I would, be the upper, sort of the better person in this conversation by wearing a Jets jersey. So I forgive you, Al, for your slight. But anyhow, it's a Jets jersey tonight. So, as Al said, I spent 17 and a half years at CSE, so Communications Security Establishment, Canada Signals Intelligence Organization. Got there as a very young puppy back in 1983 and did a whole bunch of jobs, mostly in foreign languages. But, I also was the head of collection at one point for CSE in the late 1990s. And so when you work in signals intelligence, it's what it sounds like. You're collecting signals. So you get these big antennas and all kinds of other equipment out there, and you're sucking in all this information that's being spread through the ether with a desire to find intelligence, which meets government requirements. And I recall, this is about going dark. This is about losing the ability to gather information, to get the intelligence, to advise government on what it can and cannot do or what it should and should not do. And I remember when I joined CSE way back in 1983, the primary form of signals were what we called telexes. Now, most of you have no idea what a telex is, but it was a very common way of communication, not just for companies around the world, but for embassies and their foreign ministries. So we at CSE would gather all these telexes. I won't say how we did it because it's still a secret. And I still remember to this day, we had these massive volumes, which were essentially telex telephone directory equivalents. And you collect a message, and sometimes you didn't know who the message was from or who it's to, but the telex number would tell you who sent the message and who was receiving it. So we had to go look through all these telex directories to find out what these telex numbers stood for. Anyhow, long story short, by the late 1990s, telex was dying as a technology. It simply wasn't fast enough. It wasn't good enough in the same way that, Morse code, which, dates back to the 19th century, kind of disappeared in the 20th century. Telex was being superseded by fax. Now, does anybody remember what a fax is? Okay, facsimile back in the 1990s was this new technology. And it was really great. And we were in trouble at CSE because we were having a hard time demodulating the fax signal. So in other words, you knew it was being sent using this technology, but you didn't necessarily weren't able to actually break it out. And fax was a lot harder than telex. So this is an example where, as an intelligence organization, you've got to be on top of things and be able to figure out how person A is communicating with person B. So first of all, that's the first thing. How are they sending their information? Secondly, can you collect it? Okay. Once you collect it, can you process it? Is it encrypted? Now, I spent a year and a half as a cryptanalyst at CSE in the late 80s, early 90s. I was not a mathematician, although JB can put up a great podcast I had about 6 months ago with Richard Brisson, an old friend of mine who was a mathematician at CSE. And as the neatest hobby in the world, he collects Nazi Enigma machines. This is his hobby. It's really kind of cool. He's a real cryptanalyst. We were breaking systems back then. We were able to decrypt actual government communication systems. I can tell you that by the time I left CSE in 2000 for CSIS, that was a very different world. And from what I've heard nowadays, once something's encrypted, you're screwed. The kinds of attacks that worked in the 50s, 60s, 70s, 80s, and 90s simply aren't working anymore. So Al, as somebody that worked for both the RCMP and for CSIS, from a information gathering perspective, what do you think the challenges are?
Well, you hit the nail on the head. It's the ubiquitous of encryption now is it's leaving large areas of no-go zones for law enforcement. And that's the going dark issue. They're unable to gather evidence. Security agencies are unable to gather the intelligence required. And it's more about the gathering of the content of the conversations than it is the endpoints, et cetera, like the connections, right? So it makes it very difficult. And now, since the legislation that created CSIS, I mean, we now have judicial powers to authorities to intercept and collect and analyze information. And before that, or on the criminal side, it's all covered under the criminal code, right? Where you do up an information to obtain, and then through that you do up an affidavit. It's got to go. You got to convince a judge. In the policing side, it's reasonable grounds. On the security intelligence side, it's reasonable suspicion. So there are major hoops to go through to actually have these powers authorized by a judge. So it's not easy.
And then the other thing too, Al, of course, is that, I mean, people have this, I think, erroneous impression that warrants to intercept communications are handed out like candy. In fact, it's quite the opposite, right? I mean, judges realize this is a very intrusive power for a police service or an intelligence service to have on its citizenry. And they want an extremely high standard to pass before they grant that authority, right?
Oh, exactly. And that's why there's so many internal checks and balances on that. It's at least from the security side, it is an onerous process. If there's exigent circumstances where there's an attack happening or a plot attack imminent or something like that, there are provisions to move that process quicker, to get it before a judge and get the authorization. But normally, it takes quite a while to write up these affidavits. One, to collect information to support that affidavit, and then be able to put it together and take it before a judge. And it's the same on the criminal side. Their affidavits tend to be large too for the electronic interceptions.
Right. And I'm glad you raised the imminent plot kind of thing, because one of the most famous incidents where going dark was a real problem was back in December of 2015 in Santa Bernardino, California, where a husband and wife team went into a meeting. It was a municipal meeting of some kind. It was a kind of a Christmas party / meeting. And they opened fire. They killed 14 people before they themselves were killed by police in California. And the FBI wanted to get a hold of their cell phones to see, were there other parts of the cell? Were there other attacks being planned? Who else knew about it? And of course, it was an Apple phone, and Apple said, well, you can't actually access their phones. The FBI says, well, we have to. And Apple basically told me we'll pound sand. Said, we're not going to decrypt these phones. We can't do it. We don't have the technology. If we do it in this one case, it'll ruin our reputation. People won't trust Apple anymore. And at the end of the day, you were saying earlier, the FBI just went to a bunch of Israelis and said, hey, we got a problem with Apple phones. Can you guys figure it out? And in fact, the Israelis did decrypt the phones to give the FBI the information they needed. So this is a good example of where modern technology we all rely on is getting so good that the good guys who do need actual legitimate access to this stuff can't get it.
Well, that's definitely a problem. But you have to look at the other side too. If there are backdoors to the encryption, then that just weakens encryption for everyone.
Yeah.
So this is a conundrum that the Western countries in particular face, right? And it really comes down to the level of risk that the population of country X is willing to take in security versus their privacy, right? It's an inverse relationship. Is there a balance there? There might have been at one time. I'm not so sure there is now, or can be. Partially because I don't think governments are ready to make that move to legislate or regulate the companies to actually provide that access, or provide assistance to do that. So actually create new tools to actually break into their own encryption, right? Decrypt their own products. Now, having said that, if there was a terrorist attack similar to 9/11 or the Mumbai ongoing, where the terrorists were actually communicating with encrypted apps, I think public sentiment would change, and the pressure would be on the governments, and the pressure would be on the tech companies to do something about that. But it'll take a disaster of that magnitude, I think, before Western countries will actually change that up.
Well, it usually does, right? As humans, that's the way we react to things. If something really, really bad goes on, we go, "Oh, wow, what do you mean you guys can't do this?" Well, of course you should be able to do this. So they'll put pressure on governments, they'll put pressure on courts and technology companies, et cetera, right?
So the tech companies aren't doing this for altruistic reasons. They're not the privacy advocates. You know, they like to point that out, but they've commoditized privacy. That's big money for them. Lawful access actually costs some big money to do. Mm-hmm. So if they can avoid doing that by taking themselves out of the equation, by now creating end-to-end encryption, you know, they're going to do it. They're going to take themselves away from the liability, right? At the same time that they push for their product as being the most secure, for privacy reasons. It's not the altruistic reason. Now, you know, we do need the privacy. We do need the encryption for global commerce, for government communications, for personal communications. I mean, that's a no-brainer. I mean, today's world is so interconnected, and there's so much personal information, financial, what have you, going, you know, all over the place, that we do need the encryption. It's the only way to have that cybersecurity, if you will, that we can use and rely on, right? That we don't have to worry about the breaches. Well, shouldn't say worry about them, but be overly concerned about breaches. So the end-to-end encryption actually takes away, in the past, as you know, the way the interceptions were done was mainly man in the middle.
Yeah, exactly.
Right. Yeah. And then even with encryption at one time, they were able to decrypt that once it was collected. Yep. Then with the end-to-end encryption, where the users have the keys actually, and the platform doesn't, and the platform is just kind of a dumb transport, right? Then it becomes a different issue where law enforcement and security agencies now have to think of other ways of getting that information that they're missing in between the two endpoints. They're missing that content. Exactly. So there is other information they can obtain, like metadata. Yep. But more and more that's being encrypted itself, and it's being obfuscated in different ways. So it makes it a lot harder. Mm-hmm. And to me, I think the solution is human. It's the second oldest profession. We've got to go back to that. The technology, as you know from CSC, to develop that technology and deploy it, it's expensive.
Very much so.
And the good guys are always behind the 8 ball on the tech, because the tech is moving faster than governments and security and police can keep up. And I think the move to human, which is much cheaper but has a higher risk.
Yes, exactly.
Reputational risk involved in that, right? Because just because a human, when you're dealing with a human, they're so unpredictable. With the if you're dealing with the tech side, like from the intercepts, etc., there's a lot less risk there. There's a lot less unpredictability.
Exactly. So listen, if you're just joining us, this is episode 2 of Spy Squared. I'm Phil Gursky with Al Tredenick. We're here every Thursday at 8 p.m. Eastern to talk about all things intelligence and security-wise. There's been a lot of comments coming in already, Al. I just want to go through some of them. So Brad says that North Korea is estimated to spend up to 10-20% on cyber, stealing money and crypto, which they use to fund their nuclear program. And Canada recently charged 3 North Korean hackers stealing $1.3 billion and targeting the United States as well. Brad says, of course, with COVID, more people were online working from home, more for them to access. Emil asked an interesting question that I'll punt to you, Al. With regards to the warrant acquisition process within the S&I community or within CSIS, how do they compare with the process by the police organizations like Toronto Police Services or RCMP? So again, in Canada, a warrant for police service is called a Part 6 warrant. under CSIS, it's called a Section 21 warrant. It's part of the CSIS Act. So you've been in both worlds. How would you compare the processes between law enforcement and security intelligence?
How to compare the processes?
Or were they essentially the same?
Well, I would say the process is essentially the same. I would say, on a macro level. I think from the security intelligence side of things, there may be a few more checks and balances internally, just because of the sensitivities involved in some of the warrant applications.
Now, is that because
the other thing too is the intelligence community is usually ahead in technology to do intercepts or decryption, etc., right, than law enforcement.
Right.
And I did see a question where somebody was asking about, did the particularly regular members who came over to CSIS find it frustrating we couldn't share information from intercepts with law enforcement?
That's intelligence through evidence. We're going to get to that one in a future podcast, right?
No, absolutely. But that's right. I mean, a lot of times when the security intelligence agencies can use certain technologies, those technologies are kept very, very close to the chest amongst the, our allies, etc., so that it doesn't get revealed in court, our methods, our sources and methods.
Yeah.
For that reason, because generally the security intelligence agencies don't prosecute, so we're collecting information, we can go and keep collecting that for years. Yeah. The law enforcement on the other side they're collecting for a reason, they're collecting for prosecution.
Yeah, exactly.
They're collecting evidence. So when it goes to court, there is a chance that they would have to divulge some of the information. Yeah. And that could be the technology behind the intercept. And I'm not saying it would be, but it could be. That's a risk. So it tends, information that security intelligence agencies get sometimes isn't passed because we basically have to tell law enforcement how we got it.
Exactly. Yeah. Let's leave that conversation of the more the intricacies, the one vision, intelligence evidence kind of thing. You mentioned something earlier that I want to pick up on as well, is that with end-to-end encryption, once the message is encrypted, you're screwed. It doesn't matter where you encrypt it, you can't simply get it. However, the key is, to get the message before it's encrypted. And I can tell you, without going into a lot of details, that in fact is possible. I've seen it done. And there's some
or after it's decrypted.
Yeah, and there's some amazing technology that can be used. I remember the guys that were working on it with CSE, and they developed some really cool things to be able to get to information either before it was encrypted or after it was decrypted, like you said, to be able to actually read it. It wasn't nearly as clean and easy to read as getting the actual decryption because of the technology involved, but there's always a possibility. So there's a comment just made here by Robert Mayhew. Is there a dedicated judge to get warrants from? Maybe should be just security. There are only a number of federal court judges, right, that were basically cleared to process the warrants, correct?
And there's a special court that all these applications are heard in. Yes.
Yeah. So you don't want to go to like to Judge Potter in middle of nowhere, Saskatchewan. He has no idea what you're talking about, right? You've got these judges who are trained and basically to be able to figure these things out. So. Let's pick up on the whole human thing, Al. As you said, human is the second oldest profession, or is it the first? I never know which was the oldest profession. It kind of varies from society to society, I suppose. But as someone who I worked in both SIGINT in my first half of my career, and then human afterwards with the service. Of course, I was a big SIGINT fan. That's what I did for 17 and a half years. And then when I joined the service, I realized that there's certain things that human gets you that SIGINT does not. SIGINT is essentially passive. Right, you're intercepting a conversation between Phil Gursky and Al Tredenik. You can't control the conversation. They say whatever they want, and you've got to basically try to follow along with what it is that's going on. With a human source, of course, you can direct a human source. So rather than just passively sitting back and taking the conversation, you can get your source to ask questions, seek clarification, push them down a certain line. And as someone like you had a lot of human sources in your career, I mean that's the whole point, right? If you've got a trusted human source. They're a much greater source of intelligence and the ability to direct an investigation than a SIGINT, isn't it?
Oh, absolutely. I mean, you can task the sources to as you said, go in one direction or another, ask these questions that they can be your ears into other conversations that are going on that may not have been subject to a technical intercept, right out in a park, for instance, if it wasn't being covered and they were walking with the target and the target was talking with somebody else. I mean, that sort of thing. Yeah, plus they've got the nuance of facial expressions. They can pick up all that nonverbal communication and kind of feel out what is that target actually thinking. Yeah. So, it's one thing to say that you're going to go and do this act X against person Y or something, and you might just be a poser, right? You might just be, and not really mean it.
I want to be a coach jihadi.
Well, exactly, and the human source would be able to kind of give you that flavor when you're doing the debriefing, and the source would say, no, this guy hasn't got the cojones to do that. He's just a big mouth, blah blah blah, and or this guy means it. He's he's a hard nut, and I'm getting a little concerned that somebody's going to get hurt. I mean, they pick up the nuances. They can also, and we can get in this if we do a human source segment, is they can give you the scuttlebutt in the area that you're covering. So I used to have there was a you probably it was probably before your time, but there was a senior intelligence officer in the service who used to say, you show me a source that knows the gossip in that family, and that source is gold. And to a certain extent, he was right.
Exactly. Well, a good Canadian example, I think, of a human source that was absolutely critical was the Toronto 18. I mean, whatever you think of Mubin Sheikh, he happens to be a friend of mine. I mean, he was a CISA source who agreed to work for the RCMP and testified in court. Without Mubin Sheikh, that investigation isn't nearly as robust and as complete as it is. He was able to, get the skinny and all the guys to show that they were serious. And then on the other hand, you've got human sources in the Victoria case in 2013 with John Nuttall and Amanda Karoti, and the court ruled that the sources had basically over-directed and essentially entrapped those two wankers that wanted to blow up pressure cooker bombs on Canada Day outside legislature in Victoria. So, I mean, it's a fine line to push, right, with human sources. You want them to kind of, like you say, get the skinny on people and to find out as much as they can to kind of play along. They have to sell themselves to the target, right? If the target realizes they're a source, either A, they're dead, or they won't cooperate. So, how when you were recruiting human sources and coaching them, how did you get them to, do that job in such a way that it wouldn't screw up the case down the road where judges, without the source, they wouldn't have done that.
So that's a discussion for another show because we're kind of moving off that. But human sources complement the technical intercepts. And the one thing technical intercepts will also provide intelligence officers during investigations is where to go to look for human sources.
Yes.
It will also, it'll give vulnerabilities. That's what technical ops can do, or technical intercepts can do for you as well. They'll give you the vulnerabilities. They'll give you, to a certain extent, as much of a profile as you can make electronically. And that helps when you're forming an operational plan to go do a recruitment or that. So there is the need to, and that's when encryption comes in again. The dark part of it, where we might not have as say intelligence officers who are doing the recruitments and handling of sources, we wouldn't have that insight. We wouldn't have the content of those conversations that are going on that would help us in our tasking, would help us in formulating targeting plans and things like that. So it is an issue, but again, I'll go back to saying that I understand the need for privacy. And when I left the government, right, I went and worked with BlackBerry.
Yep.
And I was responsible for their strategic relationships with law enforcement intelligence agencies around the world on lawful access issues, market access stuff, right?
Exactly.
And we did get the, BlackBerry's whole thing was security.
Exactly.
So we had to walk that fine line because we were a global company. So we were all over the world, and we had to make sure that we were in compliance with all the laws. And if we couldn't do that, we had to say why and find some sort of compromise without giving up BlackBerry encryption or IP. Mm-hmm. But we understood, obviously, BlackBerry understood the need for security and for privacy. Yeah. That's why governments around the world continue to use BlackBerry. Yeah.
That was the phone to use, right? Yeah.
Well, yeah, the phone, but that's it's the network behind it. It's It's all how BlackBerry does its thing.
Yeah.
The phone was just, that was the front piece, but the back end was always the strong point for BlackBerry. So that's why governments still use it. So we understood the privacy stuff, but we also understood the requirement for lawful access and to abide by the laws in the markets where we were selling our product or had places, right? Yep. Not all companies do that. And San Bernardino was a good example of what happened, when Apple said no.
Yeah.
And, so.
Look, there's a couple more. So just to remind you, if you just joined us, this is Spy Squared episode 2 with Phil Gursky and Al Tredenik every Thursday at 8 p.m. Shaheen says, it looks like my room's been created by the RCMP. Yes, I have changed my office at home, and so it's a different room. This is why it's different, guys. I'm going to leave Emil's question on Humid Overseas to our Humid episode, Al.
That's a good question, by the way.
Exactly. Brad says, it's like the hunt for UBL. If you go offline and start passing intel via pigeons again, SIGINT can only do so much. In fact, they found Bin Laden through a human source. They were. The other thing was surveillance. Right? It was a courier.
Well, that's how it started.
Yeah,
that's right.
Exactly. I think the bottom line is that when you look at intelligence, you have to look at all forms of intelligence. We've been talking about SIGINT. We talked about human. There's imagery. I worked on imagery for a little bit when I was at CSEs. These are pictures that satellites take or high flying planes. There's surveillance. Surveillance is a huge source of intelligence. You probably think it's like Nick Nolte and Eddie Murphy sitting in a car, right, overnight. But you can tell who goes to a target's house, who doesn't go, the kind of thing. So, there's just so many pieces of this puzzle. Matthew asks, with that, I think he's going back to this encryption. Would that imply having intercepted communication as it's being composed? I'm going to leave that question, Matthew, because I don't want to get in trouble. But so moving forward then, Al, we are faced with not only more difficult technology, but just so many different brands and so many different ways of, like I said, in the really old days, you had one mode, and that was, either Morse code or high frequency. We used to do a lot of HF collection at CSE in the 70s and 80s. And of course, telex came around, and then faxes came along, and then the whole computer explosion. We're from a security service law enforcement perspective, then, do you think we will always be 1, 2, 3, 10 steps behind the advances in technology, or is there a way to maintain maybe not complete parity in this, but at least we're still getting some of the stuff, or is that just a pipe dream?
No, I think we'll always be behind it. Well, you saw it yourself in CSE, right? With the switch from to the faxes and that sort of stuff. We're always behind a little bit. Now, maybe the intelligence agencies are not as far behind as law enforcement's had to say, but it's the reality of the situation. There is a lot of collaboration between the private sector and government agencies, both to secure communications, but also, obviously, if there's ways to get lawful access, to facilitate lawful access. It doesn't always work out that way, but it's the whole thing is to eliminate these areas where criminals can operate freely. They don't have to worry about it. And there was a question, I think, might have been from Emil, about Phantom Secure. Now, Phantom Secure was a case not too long ago that was in the media about an individual, and he was based out of Vancouver, who was running a secure communication system for organized crime and criminals. And it took quite a lot of investigation involving a number of law enforcement agencies across the globe, with the RCMP being one of the leads. And Emil asks, what did BlackBerry do in that? Well, as I mentioned, BlackBerry, we understand the need for lawful access. We also understand the need for privacy. The other thing BlackBerry didn't want to do as a corporation is to be known as the phone of choice for drug dealers and pedophiles, exactly. Right?
It's that fine balance, right? Yeah.
Well, that's right. So there's collaboration there that I'm not going to go into the details on, but assistance when it could be provided was provided. That's just a good corporate citizen thing to do.
Right. Let's just pick up on that then. So, unless you're sleeping under a rock today, the big news from today, of course, was that Facebook upheld a ruling by its inner sanctum, its inner cabal, to keep Donald Trump off Facebook because he's a stupid wanker who likes to, promote violence. And there's this big debate now whether or not Facebook should have that power, because, of course, there's First Amendment, freedom of speech, freedom of, all that kind of stuff. And we're talking a lot about fine lines today between, should companies, the private sector, have the they have to be good corporate citizens. They obviously want to sell a product. They want to sell a product that people want to buy. They want that product to be trusted by the people who purchase it. On the other hand, they want to be good, they want to be good patriots. They want to help law enforcement where they can. So there's a lot of talk these days about legislating Facebook, Twitter, WhatsApp, whatever, to take down material that promotes violence. Although what that looks like is anyone's guess, because it doesn't, have like, I'm promoting violence necessarily. It's very much a judgment call. So do you see a time, maybe in the wake of a catastrophic attack, that some country will pass a law to say you will grant us access to persons X, Y, or Z under a warrant, under a fully transparent process, and no is not an answer. No is not an option.
So we saw that after 9/11 with the Patriot Act.
Right.
That's what happened, right? And it was a reaction to an attack. And do we want that to happen again? And I think that's where this discussion has to keep going until the legislatures decide what they want to do, until the population of country X, whatever, where should the balance? Where do you as citizens of country X want your balance to be? And then you live with the cost, right? It's just nothing's for free.
Yeah.
So, and I certainly don't want to see something where we have no privacy, and I don't, but I still don't want, on behalf of victims, how do you tell victims, we couldn't get the information because company X wouldn't give it to us?
Yeah.
How do you do that?
Well, exactly. And, a few comments already about Bill C-10. Of course, the Trudeau government's passed this new bill, and they claim it's not going to, crack down on freedom of speech, but I get devils with the details kind of thing, right? But you raise a good point, Al. As a Western liberal secular democracy here in Canada, what we don't want to be is like Kazakhstan or Russia, where, we're going to assume that those states do have those powers to essentially force companies to pass on information. Of course, China does big time, right?
China does, yeah.
Absolutely, and they make no bones of it. They say our national security depends on us having full and unfettered access to all the communications in our country. So,
or any cooperation. If you're a corporation in China, you are obligated to assist when required.
Which is the whole Huawei argument, right? People saying, why would we allow Huawei here in the West? Because it is a Chinese company.
Part of it.
If the PRC says to Huawei, I want Phil Gursky's or Al Trenick's conversations, using your phones, your technology, because they're good Chinese patriots, they have no choice. You have to hand it over, right?
Or I want all the contacts.
Well, exactly. Yeah. So, so this debate about whether or not we should actually force these companies to do this is a real good one. It's not going to go away. It's something that we will always struggle with. But I'm with you. In the wake of a terrible crime, if it turns, and this is a big if, right? You go to family and say, well, if we had had access to the communications before, there's a chance we could have prevented your father, husband, whatever kind of thing from getting killed in this terrible, crime. There's no guarantees, of course, of that, but there was clearly a gap in the investigation. We didn't have this, and then we think that maybe we could have learned something. Yeah, how do you say to somebody who's just lost their loved one? Well, we couldn't decrypt the call, or we couldn't collect it, and we weren't getting cooperation from company X, Y, or Z, as you said earlier, right? I just don't think there's an easy answer to any of this stuff, and that's the beauty of living in a democracy. There's never any answers to any of this stuff.
No, there isn't. There isn't at all. I said when we were kind of putting out notice of this show, I said, is there a middle ground? Is there a solution? Technically, there could be a solution. Would it be expensive? Right. Yes. Yeah. Would it weaken encryption around the world, make everybody less safe? Yes.
Yes.
So it's just depends on where do we want to draw that line with security and privacy, right? And it comes down to each country's citizenry of where they want to be, where they want that balance to be.
Okay, so how do we make that determination then? Do we do polling? Do we ask Canadians, where do you sit on the line between 100% privacy versus no privacy, and we're law enforcement or security intelligence where there's a reasonable cause to suspect or believe something is going to happen? We grant them access to it. How do Canadians voice an opinion on this?
So that's all part of the debate, right? That's all part of the political debate. But right now, I don't think politicians want to have that debate. One, it's not a vote getter.
Yeah. And they probably don't understand it either, right? They don't understand it.
Well, a lot of people don't understand it, and that's part of the problem. It's like when the privacy issue. Governments, when you sign up to all these apps and everything, and you really rail on governments having potentially knowing where you are and everything about you. The governments have to, at least in the West, have to go through some hoops to get access to that information, when in fact you're giving it freely to the third party, the app, who is then selling all that information to other companies, third parties, without your consent. And that's where do we draw the line on this, right? And
I'm so glad you raised that last point, Al, because when push comes to shove, those people who get really upset if CSIS or the RCMP or Toronto Police Services or whomever, CSE, gets access to your data, they get all huffy and, how dare the government do this? At the same time, they're either not aware or they don't care that Facebook / Twitter / WhatsApp / 4chan, whatever, we've been giving this information to them gratis since we signed up, right? And you're right, they're using it to market to us. They're selling our information abroad. This is why you get certain ads in your emails or certain things. So why do you think it is that people get really upset when governments collect their information and don't give a rat's ass when TELUS or WhatsApp or whatever does? Like, where's the difference there?
Well, here's the difference in liberal democracies: is the government can take your freedom away.
Whereas
Whereas, you know what? Yeah, Google's got all person X's information and is selling it without person X getting any reimbursement other than the enjoyment of using the app or whatever. Right? Doesn't see any monetary gain from their information going everywhere and anywhere. But state governments, the state, can take your freedom away, and that's what we've got to watch for. I mean, that's the balance here, right? It's a fine line, and as you said before, like, how do we get there? Yeah. It's public consultation. It's engaging the private sector on this as to what is feasible, what isn't, because it used to be, and I used to make the distinction between data at rest and data in transit. And the data in transit, I would say, okay, that's off limits, because of the global interconnectivity and commerce and communications, government communications, etc. Data at rest, I always said, well, look, to me, that was no different than you having a filing cabinet in your basement. And a search warrant being executed on your house, and they come down, they go into your cabinet, and you've got personal photos in there, you've got letters, you've got phone bills. You've got anything could be in that thing. So I always looked at it like that. Well, I don't think that really, those arguments or those points now are as strong as they were before. I think what's happened is the horse has left the barn on encryption, and for government agencies, they have to embrace the new reality. I just move forward, use imagination to find other ways to get the information. Now, the man-in-the-middle content, probably not going to see that again. And like you said before, you got to do it from one end, before it's encrypted, or you get it after it's decrypted, right? So you compromise one end or both of the communications, but they've got to start looking at that. It costs too much now to do the technological solutions and implement them compared to human source operations. Now, the risk is higher on the human source, and we'll get into that in another show. But on the tech side, it's for any agency that's risk averse or government that's risk averse. That's perfect. We put a case before a judge. The judge signed it off, said we could do it, and we can do it, and nobody knows we're doing it. So the risk there is pretty low. Yeah,
exactly. Matthew's weighed in with a really good point. These ticking time bomb scenarios always lead to bad or poorly written policy and practice. Hello, post 9/11, right? I mean, a lot of what happened after post 9/11 was badly planned because people panicked. They panicked for a very good reason. There's 3,000 people dead. That's the largest single act of terrorism. And so there wasn't a lot of time for, sober second thought and let's put this to a committee for 6 months. No, the action that was taken, and there were some good actions taken after 9/11, but an awful lot of poor ones as well. So Soul Crusher says the secret police have always existed. Their reach has expanded. The question today, should we allow it to be legal? I'm assuming you mean secret police should be legal. Well, again, that's a question for our societies. Do you want to have a security intelligence service? Do you want law enforcement agencies to be able to do investigations that are secretive in nature, to collect information to prevent bad things from happening? The answer is either be yes or no. And a lot of this bullshit today about defund the police and all that kind of stuff. Well, yeah, there are issues with police, absolutely, but take away the police forces tomorrow or security intelligence tomorrow, we live in a very different country, and I'm not so sure it would necessarily be a better country, right? I think people get very confused and always assume the worst. And again, have mistakes been made? Absolutely, and always will be. But the point is that these agencies exist for a reason, and that's to stop things from going bang in the night.
No, that's right, and it's kind of like I said in the last show, right? Canadians, we don't see ourselves as having a natural enemy. Plus, we tend to look at the world as the way we'd like the world to be, not the way it actually is. And, because of the way it actually is, you need to have law enforcement agencies, you need to have security services to protect the democracy and the freedoms that we have and we enjoy now.
Well, and that's especially true. And, I don't know if we talked about this last time, Al, but the most recent public report by CISA talked about foreign infiltration and foreign interference by people like the Chinese, right? I mean, these are states that are they have one goal in mind only, and that's to undermine our democracies. It's to undermine the system.
Well, they have a different view. They have a different view of what system's better, right? They've got the, an autocratic, or they're kind of a technocrat type of society, and it works for them. And they maintain power by part of it by the surveillance technology that they have and the way that it's used. I don't want to see that here. I don't think anybody that works in the security services or the police want to see that either. What we do want to see is the tools, or have the tools necessary and the strategies necessary to make sure that the bad guys can't continue. And in the case of technology, that we stop victimization over the internet.
Yeah. Right.
And that's huge now. And how do you do that when you've got anonymization going on? So, plus the encryption. I mean, it makes law enforcement's job exceedingly difficult.
Exactly. So we're entering our last 15 minutes of this episode 2 of Spy Squared. I'm Phil Gursky with Al Tredenick. We're here every Thursday at 8 p.m. Emil raised a good point. It kind of refers back to something else that we talked about before, Al, and that is that, let me just find it here.
So the only thing I'd like to make a comment on is, if to our listeners out there, if they like what they're hearing, hit the like button.
Yeah.
Right?
Exactly.
Because it affects the algorithms. And we're talking about this, right? the tech stuff.
It's all about
right? It affects the algorithms. So if you want to see us continue with these discussions, hit the like button.
Exactly. And tell your friends. Tell your friends about us every Thursday.
Otherwise, YouTube could say, wow, these guys are no good.
Yeah, exactly. Too old farts. So Emil says hackers are mostly third world. Isn't it cheaper just to engage them? According to Bellingcat, that's exactly what the Russians do. Well, you know, hackers are hackers, right? There's hackers here in Canada. There's hackers in Israel. There's hackers in the United States. You know, some would say there's an ethical issue with engaging hackers because hackers do good things and they do bad things. But again, in the case of the San Bernardino killers, they needed the information. They needed it now. They had to determine if there were more killings than what to be planned, and then so they paid whatever they had to pay to those Israeli hackers to get into the iPhone that that couple had.
Yeah, no, but I agree. You know, engage them. You know, whether for good or for bad, engage them. I mean, that's what an intelligence service is all about. And we can get into that with the human source stuff. And you know, if you engage them for the right reasons, and they put on the Team Canada jersey, then you know, they could find vulnerabilities that, you know, for a short period of time, the government could exploit. But more and more now, the thinking is that once you find the vulnerability, we have to advise the companies of the vulnerability so that they can do the patches and mitigation work required. You know, okay, that's a bit of a pain because it just makes the going dark forefront again. But if you're continually engaging hackers, you're going to continually find vulnerabilities. Exactly.
Let's go back to this whole encryption thing for a little bit, just to kind of, you know, when we talk about going dark, I mean, there's always been a game of catch up with encryption. So let's go back to the Nazis in World War II. They had a machine called the Enigma machine. As I said, my friend Richard Brisson, he collects them. He's a really cool guy here in Edinburgh that collects this kind of stuff. You know, at first, the Nazis had this machine. It was basically unbreakable. Right. The Allies couldn't break it. And it got worse because it was a machine. It was a box with 3 rotors inside, and then they added a 4th rotor midway through the war, which changed the combinations exponentially, almost infinitely in terms of that. Now, if you've ever seen him with Benedict Cumberbatch, he plays on Turing, great UK mathematician who was the predecessor of GCHQ, I guess back then. You know, and they were able to decrypt Nazi Enigma machine encryptions because of mistakes made by the operators. That was the key. They were able to, because the operators did the same thing on a whole bunch of messages, and that's called a crypt. And once you figure out if they do the same thing all the time, you can start to get into the back door of kind of encryption. Now that, you know, so that took a lot of effort. I mean, in fact, you know, the first kind of the predecessor of the Cray computer was invented by the Brits to break German Enigma machines, right? It was they called it the bomb. Well, not bomb as in blowing up things. The computer was called the bomb. But that's always been the game with encryption, you know, is that states and universes that use it realize they have to get better and better all the time because every system has its vulnerabilities. And like I said, you know, by the 1990s at CSE, we would reach the end of affordable, usable decryption techniques. We simply were not reading anything anymore. And you know, further to our point that nowadays, you know, you can purchase encryption online or get it for free, which is. And I remember I attended a talk in the late 1990s at CSE, and a guy came up from the States, and he said, and this is back like 97, 98. He said the encryption is getting so good. That's just 30 years ago. Encryption was getting so good that, you know, the entirety of the world's computers working for the life of the universe could never decrypt it. That was 25, 30 years ago. Imagine now what this technology, you know, talk about quantum encryption, where the mere fact that you even intercept the message, the sender and the receiver know the message has been intercepted because of the way that it's been transmitted. So, you know, it gets to a point where it's just simply not, it's just not feasible. Yeah. And that's part of going dark.
That's absolutely right. And that's why I said at the beginning, you know, we got to go back to the second oldest profession, and that's human.
And, you know, you and I are the only ones that realize that, right? You know, it's funny, Al, you mentioned that, because I do recall that sort of post-Cold War, the Americans decided to put all their eggs in the SIGINT basket. SIGINT got all of the resources after the Cold War ended, because we weren't reading Soviet cyber systems. Trust me. I mean, I remember the guys who used to collect that stuff, and they were just collecting it just like collecting hockey cards. I mean, they couldn't read any of it, kind of thing, right? But human was what we did in the Cold War. We recruited agents, they recruited agents, we ran them back and forth, et cetera, et cetera. But they decided for whatever reason that SIGINT was the future of intelligence in the 1990s. And as a result, and some have said, and I don't want to overemphasize this point or over-exaggerate it, some have said that one of the problems with 9/11 is that, you know, they relied on SIGINT, whereas if they had a few good human sources at the time, they could have infiltrated the cells that were in Boston and New York and in places like that. What do you think about that?
Well, it's a shiny object, and it's less risk, right? The tech stuff than dealing with a human and having to go where the information is and actually send, say, officers into conflict zones, etc. That there's more risk there than there is, you know, just vacuuming up the digital universe, right? It's
well, as Tova said, it's the art of conversation, understanding human behavior, and you can only really do that with a human source, right? Emilio's made a point here. I'm not sure if it's something you'd follow at all. He says there apparently, with regards to patches and vulnerabilities, apparently China used a recent hackathon and vulnerability discovered in iPhones to spy on China. Are Western intelligence using similar tools? Apparently, this happened at a hackathon in Vancouver. I don't know anything about that. I don't know if that's something that crossed your radar or.
Well, the hackathons are going on all the time. I haven't heard of that particular thing. So, I mean, I'd be interested in following that up if Emil wants to send us a message on that. But yeah, you know, it wouldn't surprise me, but I don't have any insight on that at the moment.
Okay, Ratnadeep from India, welcome back, by the way. He's our Indian colleague. Can an intelligence agency run an unauthorized surveillance on someone being a suspect for a short period to rule out a possibility? So this is where there's different levels of investigation that can be, and levels 1, 2, and 3 we had at CSIS. Level 3 is the most intrusive, and that's where you generally go for, correct me if I'm wrong, Al, this is where you go for a warrant to court to say, you know, we know so much about Phil Gursky, there's something we don't know, we only think we can get that part we don't know, and here's all we have so far on him. We think he's a really, really bad guy. We've got this gap here, and we're pretty sure the gap can only be filled by getting a federal court warrant.
Right. It has to be, the investigation has to have progressed up to the level 3, and the techniques that are used within that do include federal court warrants. Right.
But the previous levels can be done completely internally within the service because you're not going for those really intrusive powers, right? Like surveillance and that kind of thing. Levels 1 and 2.
Correct.
Okay. So basically the answer is yes, Ratnadeep, is that you can do surveillance on somebody at a very low level. And in fact, surveillance is always there. Even once you get your intercept powers, your warrants, for surveillance is always a part of the picture. Like I said earlier,
we're talking about Canada here, right? The other countries have their own processes, etc. So, you know, in many countries they don't even have any judicial oversight over technical intercepts, etc. Right?
Well, that's what we're saying, right? And this is the argument. You know, do we want Canada to go down the road of Kazakhstan and and someone said, yes, Kazakhstan's nice. They created Borat. Okay, we'll go with that. But do we really want
something to be said in that?
Well, I suppose. Do we really want to be a country where there are no limits, there are no rules, and then intelligence and law enforcement agencies can do whatever they want without any kind of oversight? I think the answer is no. We do want, as you've been said, and we've been saying all night. We want that collaboration, want the cooperation of the tech companies. We want them to, work with us where they can, but we have to show why that they should do this because, you talked about RIM, you talked about BlackBerry, the expectations of privacy, the fact that their products will not be purchased if people don't trust them anymore. Again, it goes back to that fine line, right? As I keep telling people, life is always multiple shades of gray. I always used to say it was 50 Shades of Grey until some idiot stole that title for a book that I swear I've never read. But it's never easy, right? It's just a yes or no. And I think people want yes or no answers. They want things that are easy to understand, and none of this is easy to understand.
No, that's right. That's right.
So we're drawing to a close to episode 2 tonight. I don't know if there's any other comments? But Robert says, in my hometown, there's a secret black building right beside NORAD local state. There's listening to the base. Well, you can think that, Robert. Sure, there's all kinds of secret things going on. There's a Bell telephone building up the street from me, but I don't worry too much about that.
Well, I don't know. I saw you wearing a tinfoil hat one day.
That's true. That's true. So we are drawing to a close to episode 2. We scheduled this for an hour every Thursday, and so where do you want to go next week, Al? What do you want to pick up on? I mean, there's so many topics that we can talk about. What would be your preference for next week's chat?
What about the requirement? Does Canada need a foreign intelligence service, a separate foreign intelligence service?
That's a real good one.
Let's do that one.
Okay, so next you heard it here
and
first.
Let's challenge some of our former colleagues to send in comments and questions on that.
I will do that. Actually, it's there's somebody. Someone who works for me at Ottawa U who's just written a short paper on whether or not Canada needs a foreign intelligence service. So I'll share that. I'll put it up the Ottawa U site.
Wasn't that Hensler, was it?
No, Hensler. No. Don't be dropping names here. Come on, this is supposed to be anonymous. But no, it's a great topic, and it's one that's been subject of conversation for a very, very, very long time. We are the only major Western power that does not have a separate foreign intelligence service. So just, to set up the conversation here, CSIS does have a foreign intelligence mandate. It's under Section 16 of the CSIS Act. And I used to work very closely with CSIS when I was at CSE on Section 16 stuff. But here's the clincher. And this makes no sense, right? When the CSIS Act was created back in '84, the powers that be were really, really afraid to create a Canadian foreign service. And so they said CSIS has the authority to collect foreign intelligence, with the infamous 2-word clause at the very end, within Canada. So we can be a foreign Canadian. How Canadian, right? We can collect foreign intelligence provided it's within Canada. So people are saying, you're collecting foreign intelligence on foreign states, but you can't leave Canadian borders to do so. Isn't that kind of like an oxymoron or something? Or I mean, that's the right word, but yeah, it's a very, very Canadian solution to things. So they're basically going on. Do we, do you remove within Canada from Section 16? Do you give CSIS a dual, like the Kiwis? New Zealand Security Intelligence Service has both foreign intelligence and security intelligence. Most other Western powers have separate agencies. So you have your BSS. So MI5 is security intelligence. MI6 is foreign. Of course, if the FBI is security intelligence, is law enforcement as well. The CIA is foreign intelligence, although also do security intelligence. You have ASIO and ASIS in Australia. You have the French, the Germans. Everyone else seems to have a separate foreign intelligence service. So Al and I next week are going to resolve the issue once and for all about whether or not Canada should have a separate foreign intelligence service. So join us, same Borealis Atnos time, same Borealis Atnos station, a week from tonight to talk about Canada's foreign intelligence service. So do you want to give a sneak preview, Al, of what we're going to say, or you want to keep stum until next week?
For the foreign intelligence?
Yeah.
I think, you outlined it very well. People have to keep in mind that CSIS does have a mandate also to follow up security intelligence anywhere in the world. So, so there's probably a good reason to have a foreign intelligence service.
Emil says we should call it the Foreign Intelligence Service of Canada, or FISC.
I kind of like chaos myself.
Okay. Yeah, well, I followed you during your career, Al, so I completely understand why you like chaos.
Hey, I never got stress. I gave it.
This is true. The other thing as well, I mean, I want to throw out there is maybe after the foreign intelligence, what I like us to broach is right-wing extremism, because I know you worked that in the 1990s in Canada. You had a role in that. I want to talk about whether or not it is as big a threat as everyone seems to be screaming that it is. You saw, of course, the Proud Boys were chosen as a terrorist group due to government pressure, not because they actually were a terrorist group, in my opinion. And this week they decided to disband. And so there's been all this commentary on what to do about the Proud Boys. So I really
and that's not unusual for groups, right? That get listed. They'll disband and then they pop up under other names. Or
Al-Majah Ruin in the UK changed their name 5 times a week.
Exactly.
Kind of thing. So yeah. Okay, guys, that's it for this week. Please, like us on Facebook, like us on Twitter, like us on everywhere else. Share the information with your friends.
And if you have any suggestions that you want us to talk about, please send them in.
Absolutely. Yeah, we're always looking for topics. So we're going to be here for quite some time still, every Thursday at 8 o'clock Eastern. And thanks for participating. Thanks for your comments tonight, guys. And we'll see you a week from tonight. See you then, Al.
All righty. Take care. Bye-bye.